What up, Dangle Crew? I think I'm gonna start saying that. You guys like that? Yeah? Up, no, vote it down in the comments. I kind of like it, dude. But we're out here on Firewalls. It was freezing. We got down to Florida, absolutely bitter, and now it is gorgeous, dude. Like 80s, 60s at night. Scotty Martin actually posted something like a few weeks ago. It's gonna be the great bass wave of 2025. It's about to go down. And that got me thinking about baits. And there's a couple techniques in Florida that we use and that everybody knows. They're super prominent. Actually just won a tournament on Toho doing one of them, one of the guys that I know. And they're super prominent down here. They don't get as much exposure or as much hype outside of Florida. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna run through a technique that's one of my favorites for this early springtime. It's a soft plastic technique using just a soft plastic worm, but it has to be a specific kind of worm, and how to do it and how to fish it in multiple different ways so you can literally have this one worm tied on and do like 6 different things with it to cover water during that pre-spawn early spring period. So hit that like and subscribe button. I'm gonna show you a little Florida juice. So when I was fishing the BFLs, the technique or the kind of setup and rig I'm gonna show you is tenderly, with all niceness, known as like the co-angler's clutch, dude. Every single co-angler I've ever had in the boat when I fished the BFLs down in Florida had this tied on. And there's a very good reason. 1, it catches numbers, and 2, it catches big ones. And it's a great way to cover water. 3, you can do a million different things with it, dude. And what I'm talking about, the most classical one is this guy. It's a Zoom speed worm. There's all different sizes. We're gonna get into that in a minute. But the concept is a swimming worm. And what we do down here in Florida is we use a swimming worm a lot like most guys in other places use what's called a swim jig, you know? It's one of those deals where we throw it out there and it's a bait like a jig that you normally like drag, right? You normally drag like an arky jig or a football jig or something, but instead of dragging it, we're swimming it like that swim jig. We're actually taking it and setting it up on a Texas rig and using that tail, that sort of U-shaped tail, to kind of create a swimming or a buzzing vibration in the water. And it's super versatile in Florida because versus a swim jig, which we do throw quite a bit in Florida, there's so much cover. You can see there's a bunch of pads around me, emergent vegetation. There's tons of grass. There's tons of emergent kind of stalky vegetation. As well as you get further north, there's stumps and that. There's so much cover that you need something that's ultra weedless, ultra snagless. The other thing is you need something that won't hook up all that goop, right? A jig, although it can get through a lot of different cover, oftentimes will track a lot of that goo and that slime that can be on the bottom when you're in this kind of early spring pre-spawn period. And that Texas rig that you're using with that swimming worm is just, it's unanimously clean to fish. So the first thing that we do with this thing is we throw it on flats, right? Giant grass flats. Just cast and reel. You're able to kind of pulse it, treat it a lot like a spinnerbait. You're kind of slow rolling it through the grass, trying to tick any kind of grass or submergent kind of cover of vegetation that's there. Another thing that we do with it, and this is more something that I've done with it on Guntersville, is I'll actually skip it. Since it's a soft plastic, it's very easy to skip and kind of slang on that roll cast. So you can kind of slang it in there and just slow roll it. Now, what's kind of fun, once again, coming back to these pads, is when you have this thing tied up, it's also a great way to fish top water, almost like a buzz bait over some of this emergent cover. Now, I'm gonna show you setups in a second. That's kind of a point where you wanna switch to some braid because the cover is so thick, but you can just kind of put your rod tip up at a 45 and just buzz it, and the thing will do kind of a blub, 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 and it'll roll and ride, much like a Big Easy does, over that cover, just creating a small kind of kicking motion with the tail, kind of like a super subtle soft plastic buzz bait. And then the last thing, obviously, since it's on a Texas rig, since it is a soft plastic worm, at any point during your retrieve when you're swimming this thing, or if you just see a fish out there, maybe on a bed, or you see a piece of cover, you can just flip it out there. So it's a super versatile setup. My general setup for this is a KS2 Elite. This is a 7.2 medium heavy, so not super stout, not super soft. I'll have that on a 721 Shimano SLX. This setup has fluorocarbon. I got 17-pound red label on there. Now, if I was fishing super heavy cover, I'd probably bump up to 40 or 50-pound braid. When we used to do this on Okeechobee a lot, we'd go up to that 50-pound braid. We'd also up the rod slightly to either a 7.6 or a 7.5 heavy. You don't want to go super heavy because you need enough tip in that rod to actually, when they grab it, to kind of feel them and set the hook well, but you need enough stoutness to pull them out. My general setup with fluorocarbon is just an O'Shaughnessy hook. This is the 6-inch version. I'm going to show you a little bit bigger one from Mondo's in a second. But this is the 6-inch burner worm. There's, you know, Zoom has their speed worm in the smaller version, very comparable. The main concept being is that U tail. Weight-wise, I think this is a 4-aught O'Shaughnessy hook. I have a little bobber stopper on there, and 100%, the most universal tungsten weight to use with this is a 3/16. You ask JT, you ask any of the big Florida guys, any of the local like regional pros that are down here that absolutely tear it up on Kissimmee, Okeechobee, wherever, 3/16. And I can vouch for that too, because on Guntersville, when I'm fishing this in the eelgrass in that pre-spawn period, 3/16 is a go-to. Now, that doesn't mean you can't fish heavier if you're trying to fish deeper flats, but 3/16 allows you the versatility to fish 4 to 6 foot, 2 to 6 feet. It also allows you to kind of buzz that bait over the top without there being too much weight, and you can always slow down and slow roll it super slow to fish it deeper. I feel like during the spring, these fish are kind of like chasing brim once they get shallow enough. So like that black blue, that's actually JB Blue from Gambler. I have it in the bigger worm, which we're gonna talk about in a second. Green pumpkin, black blue, one of my staples. And then in the Zoom guy, I think that's watermelon candy. You know, you can't go wrong with that. But darker colors, that does not mean that later in the spring during like the shad spawn or something like that, that you can't go to a white and use it around that shad spawn, around wherever the shad are balled up and those fish are schooling. It's actually a great way to fish that when they're relating to grass or docks, but that's not what we're talking about right now. Usually darker colors, water can be dirty, and the brim are up shallow during that spawn when the bass are moving up. Plus it looks like a bed invader. Now, if you're looking to go a little more mondo, or you're looking to fish it more topwater, that's when we go to this guy. Zoom makes one, Gambler makes one. There's a wide range of these guys, so don't be kind of like pigeonholed by just Gambler and Zoom. There's a million different swimming worms. The concept though, you gotta have just a small tail. You're not looking for a big ribbon tail like soft plastic deal. You're just looking for this little U-shaped tail because you're just looking for a little bit of a kick or a blow, much like a rage craw tail or a burner craw tail, just that little kicking tail. Now this is the 7-inch burner worm. It's mondo, bro. Like, it's a big one. But when it comes to Florida, or if you're fishing lakes that have some big bass or eat some very big forage, you got big brim, something like that, the bigger worms are actually killer because you can cast them an absolute mile and they float up really well on that 3/16, so they're a little easier to buzz higher in the water. Plus you get this cool fall, and that's something that's unique, especially as you get into the bigger ones. If you notice, the body on this guy, if you were to remove that tail, is very comparable to like a Senko or a stick bait. So when you actually kill this thing, you get a little bit of that shimmy as you kind of like kill it, you're slow reeling it, it's getting up in the water column, you get a little bit of that shimmy as it's falling down. And that's oftentimes a trick when you're fishing around like blind bed fishing, we call it. So you got like a flat, there's fish bedding, you can't see them because the water's tannic or dark. So you're just slow rolling this thing and the majority of fish are gonna pop up, right? But if you see like a hole in the grass or you see a stump or some kind of structure that's isolated or some kind of difference in the cover, you can actually slow roll that thing just like you would with spinnerbait and then kill it and let it flutter down and then start it up again. And oftentimes that fall or that initial, like that stop, that change in trajectory, that will trigger those fish to eat. Another little kind of fun note is when you're fishing these bigger ones or even the smaller ones, a lot of times you'll have gar, junkfish, or even like little bass, they're gonna rip that tail off. Now, these things aren't cheap, right? They're $5, $6, $7, especially on the big ones. What you can do is actually save that plastic and you get yourself a stick bait. So you can kind of like dual purpose it. The other thing that I use these guys for is if I ever have the tails cut off, I cut them in half and I can use them for Magnum Ned baits. So they're kind of like multifaceted, pretty versatile, and then you can kind of get the most money out of your plastics. Try this out because I think it's one of the most neglected techniques, especially outside of Florida. I have smashed them up on Guntersville on this deal. It's an easy way to kind of come behind a guy who's throwing a chatterbait, throwing some of those big hard style reaction baits that maybe are just too aggressive because there's a dead flat kind of lake, there's not much chop on the water's super clear, the fish are finicky, you know, just things along those lines, or the cover is too thick to actually run a chatterbait, a spinnerbait, a crankbait, or something like that through. That swimming worm allows you the same sort of effectiveness of efficiency. You can cover water, slang it out there, reel it back, use varied retrieve, speed it up, slow it down. Check it out though, swimming worm's absolutely killer. It's one of those things, it's a staple in Florida. It's been that way, bro. I'm getting old for this game. It's been that way for like 25 plus years. It's the co-angler's go-to, dude. It catches fish, catches numbers, allows you to cover water, and it catches some big ones in the process. You're actually gonna see us throwing it quite a bit when we're down here, especially like Stick Marsh, Headwaters, places that have a ton of grass and a ton of flats that you really can't get a hard bait through. Hope you guys enjoyed this though, and you can implement this into your fishing. Dangle crew. It's my boys, dude. But try it out. It definitely catches fish going into this early spring period, and it's not something that you hear much about outside of Florida, so it might be something that on your lake they haven't seen as much of. I will see you later, boys. I'll put links to all this stuff down in the description box at Tackle Warehouse and Monster Bass. I'm gonna go slang a little bit.